So we're going to introduce the graph of sine and cosine. They're actually the same graph, just shifted. If you were to graph sine of x, let me zoom in. And then if I graph cosine of x, you'll see they're really just the same graph. If I just shift it over, I think I need to shift this one over. Let me think real quick. Pi over 2, yeah, minus pi over 2. So if I shift it over, you can see it's actually the same graph. So another cool thing about it, if you look at the sine graph, you see how it's just the same graph. As I keep scrolling to the right, it's still the same graph. It keeps repeating itself. And why is that? Because once we go around the unit circle, once we go around one time, we then just can keep going around it, and it's the exact same value. So every 2 pi, we keep repeating the same unit circle, right? So that's why the sine graph is the same forever and ever and ever. It's called periodic, and we're going to focus on the period in a couple lessons, just introducing graphs of sine real quick. But we'll go over more of that in that lesson. Amplitude is going to be how high. Well, let's start with midline. Midline is right in the middle of that sine graph. So I can shift that up or down, like +5 here would bring my sine graph. Now my new midline is right here at 5. So it goes right through the middle. Notice that is right in between the top and the bottom. We can call this the hill, not the valley. So right in between the hill and the valley, right in the middle of that is our midline. And the amplitude is the distance from the midline to the hill or to the valley. So once again, the amplitude is the distance from the midline up to the top and from the midline down to the bottom. So in this first lesson, we're going to be focused on just finding the midline. What is the equation of the midline? Notice it's y equals, because that's a horizontal line. Y equals 1, y equals 2, whatever it may be. We're going to figure out where is that middle spot at. And there's some decimals and things here. Try to trick us a bit. So we want to know what number is right in between these two. Notice how they gave us the top, they gave us the bottom. We want right in the middle of that. Somewhere in here is the middle. So what is that middle? So how do we find the middle number? You guys should know this. I think this is like 7th grade math or something like that, but also it's stats. It's a very important thing for applied math, for real world math, and that is finding the average. So what are we going to do? We're going to find the average between the two numbers. Now, well, the average between what? The x or the y? Well, I don't realize x is horizontal distance. Do I want the middle horizontal distance? No. I want the middle between the vertical distance between the two. There's a vertical distance here, and I want right in the middle of that vertical distance. So I'm going to go ahead and use the y values to find the middle of that vertical distance. So this is 2.5 on the top. This one's negative 4.5 on the bottom. So we're going to average those two. So 2.5 plus negative 4.5 divided by 2. In case you don't know how to find an average. I mean, finding an average is pretty simple. You just add the numbers and divide by how many numbers we have. Now we're just averaging 2 numbers, so we're just going to divide it by 2. And so negative 2.5 minus 4.5, I think that's going to be negative 2 over 2, which gives us negative 1. And actually, that's right where I drew it, which seems to be right in the middle. So that worked pretty good, right? So y equals negative 1 is your answer. So that's if they give us the top and they give us the bottom. Just like over here, you're going to do the same thing just with negative 2.2 and negative 8.5. Now, they might switch it up. Look at the way that they gave us this one. They're not giving us the top. They're only giving us the bottom. If you look at this example, they're only giving us the top and not the bottom. So what do we do in this situation? Well, let's read it. If you read it, they're telling you right here that, boom, you got an amplitude of 3. Now, what does that mean? What is amplitude? Well, remember right here, the amplitude is the distance from the midline. Now, I get kind of tired of students asking in these kind of questions, like in the past, do I add or do I subtract? And I'm thinking like, okay, we're on the bottom, right? We're starting on the bottom. We know our amplitude is 3. Why in the world, to find the middle, would I subtract 3 from the y value? Or they'll ask, do we do it to the x value? Why would I subtract 3 to the x value? I don't care about -1, x is -1. I want to find, what are we trying to find here? In math, you got to start with that. What are you trying to find? What is your goal? The equation for the midline. I want to find this middle spot right here. That is my goal. How do I find that middle spot? Well, if I have the bottom, and I know the amplitude is the distance between the valley and the midline, or the peak and the midline, right? The mountain and the midline there. So I know that midline is 3 away from here. Why would I subtract 3 from there? That would send me down that direction. There's no reason you want to do that. You want to find the midline, so we're going to add 3 to that number. So you're like, well, how do I know when? How do I know? What situation are you in? Think about it. So we have -0.9 plus 3 is going to be 2.1. So that seems about right. That's about where I drew the green line, right? So y equals this. So y is going to equal 2.1. Just like this one, and this is where we get a little more confused. So the midline's somewhere around here, just estimating. So amplitude of 4.2. So that's my distance to the midline. So I'm going to subtract 4.2 to get there. Because I want to take that top 1.8 and take away the 4.2 so that way it sends us down to the midline. Remember, our goal is to get that equation of the midline. So a little bit of thinking there. Don't overthink it. What are you trying to find here? Trying to find the midline. So I need the middle number between the two y values. I need that middle, that vertical distance. So I average the two numbers. Here, we're given the amplitude, which I know is the distance from the min or the max to the midline. So since I'm on the minimum, I want to add up to the midline. If I'm on the maximum, I'll subtract down to the midline. And that's it. That's everything on this assignment.